Assalamu alaikum. We're here at the Tayba office. I'm Issa, the office manager of Tayba Foundation. We're here with Shaykh Rami Nsour, one of the founder and director of Tayba. Also with Ustad Nabil Afifi, who's the other co-founder and the marketing guru of Tayba. And also we're here with Roderick Adeeb Thompson. And Brother Adeeb's story is unique. I've known Brother Adeeb since 2008 when I first met him when I arrived at Avalon State Prison. Adeeb's story is unique because, for one, the brother did 36 years in prison, which is unheard of. That's almost the majority of my life. I was like 7 years old when the brother got locked up. So that in itself is like a story alone. I just have a few questions for Adeeb. I was just filling him in that Tayba Foundation is working on a rebranding. We're working on introducing life skills and reentry. Right now we're doing education, but we're getting into the life skills and the reentry part of it as well. And Adeeb just came back from visiting Buffalo, New York. After 40 years of not being in Buffalo, in his hometown, he went back and he was telling us how much he enjoyed it and so forth. And for our reentry part, if Adeeb does decide to go to Buffalo, this may be one of the areas where we could use his expertise of knowing the area, but also trying to develop a reentry home in Buffalo, in which that would be another Tayba student giving back to the Tayba Foundation, but also looking out for Adeeb as well. So I just have a few questions for Adeeb. How did you come into Islam?
It was a long road. My previous life prior to embracing Islam was, drug and alcohol, which brought me to prison. Lack of education, lack of understanding history, about African Americans and stuff like that. I sat on the road approximately 8 years into my incarceration and started to broaden my horizon. I started to study African American history. I got exposed to certain brothers that practice Islam, and they invited me to go to Talim's with this brother, Imam of CRC, brother Imam Naim Alameen, who passed away, alhamdulillah, and brother blessed for all the work that he had done. And I just started being progressive like that. I told myself, it was ignorance that had brought me to prison. So I said, I need to go back and enlighten myself in education, proper education. And proper education for me was self-study. And that's what I did. Instead of getting out of books that was already prescripted for me, I went into my own self-study and discovered many different things. One of the things that really sparked my interest as far as Islam was concerned was slave trade. When the slave trade took place, it was mostly off the west coast of Africa. And, there were Muslims, that came across also. So when I thought about that, I said, hey, back to my roots. I said, one of my ancestors could have been a Muslim. And that kind of was like the seal, that solidified my journey, into Islam.
Was there a specific book that you read that you can remember that helped you gravitate to Islam? Like, was there something like what were your resources that you read about Islam before you took Shahada?
I mean, there was a number of books. Nation of Islam, it was pretty much a prominent group inside these institutions, the prison environment, and Message to the Black Man, and some other books that I had kind of read that was part of, understanding Islam, in its proper phase, proper manner.
Excuse me. Earlier, you were talking about W.E.B. Du Bois,
yeah,
and some other. Were there some other and we were talking about the black loyalists in the American Revolution.
Mm-hmm.
Was that were there any books or any specific line of readings or thought that really impact? I'm just interested to see how that connection went from studying African American history. Then, of course, that takes you to West Africa, which leads to Islam. But what I would be interested in is knowing like what were some of the genre of the readings that you're reading for the history.
It was a number of, J.A. Rogers, Dr. Henry Clark, books come off to the top of my head. I really can't recall those books right at the moment. But there was a listing. There was a tremendous list of different books that when I had gotten exposed to Islam, one of the Muslim, I would say it was Shaykh at the time, he just had a number of books, and what he would do, he would just give me a book, to read, and then when I read that book, he would ask me questions about what I read to make sure that I read the book, and then he would further advance me into other books. Like I said, I got exposed to the Nation of the Black Man, Message of the Black Man, and those type of books, and then eventually moved into Islamic type materials, like the attributes of Allah. Books on prayer, because those were some of the things that I had to rectify in order for me to come into Islam was, could I pray 5 times a day? And could I fast 30 days in the month of Ramadan? Those were some of the things I had to consider. But majority of the what really brought me into Islam was just watching Muslims when I was at CRC. And as I said, the imam that was at CRC, I would go to Talim and just sit down and talk with him. And that was kind of the influence that once I had gone through Black history, on my trail down Black history, the path of Black history, I knew it wasn't just that. There was more to it than that, because, we start looking at, the autobiography of Malcolm X, that was, kind of like the trail that he went down. It was, exclusively Black. And then when he made Hajj, when he came back, it opened up, and he found that it was much more Muslims besides just, the perspective that he was under in the Nation of Islam. So that's kind of like what happened to me. When I started going to the Talims and those type of things, I just still was kind of like struggling between Christianity, studying the Bible, because that's what I did. I read the Bible from cover to cover, which I had never done, and it was just going to Talim, and just in my heart, I just said, it's got to be something, about this Islam, because I kept turning away from it, but every time I would be coming back. So when I went to San Quentin for a CADX program, I had a church that first Sunday that I had gone, and it just didn't feel right, because it was, they were playing music, singing gospel songs, those type of things. And I said, no, this ain't for me. I said, I need to hear something that's going to talk to me, So I went over to what the Muslim was doing that Sunday. And the imam at San Quentin was Rafiq Hassan at that time. And I sat down and listened to the Talim, and I was like, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Give me something that I can learn something from. Give me something that, I can ponder on. And about a week or so later after that, I just embraced Islam. I said,
And what year was this?
This was 1993.
MashaAllah. MashaAllah. And did you do it in front of like Juma, in front of the congregation, or you just did it with the imam? Or?
I did it in front of the congregation.
MashaAllah. MashaAllah. So let's move a little bit forward. What were some of the most difficult challenges you faced in prison before Islam and then after Islam?
The more difficult challenges in prisons before Islam?
Before Islam. Like the politics, the just getting used to the environment, this abnormal environment.
Yeah, there were some difficulties there. When I first went into the institution, I'm a first termer, never been incarcerated before. They're sent to Folsom State Prison, which was a level 4, high security, stabbings, gunshots. When I first spent the first day in that cell, coming from a reality of freedom, into the shock of incarceration. Because after I left the military, 3 years later, I was incarcerated because I was on bail at the time. So in a 3-week period of time, transitioning from freedom, being an American soldier into being an American prisoner, that happened within a 3 weeks period of time. So I went into Folsom State Prison at the age of 23, and the first day in that cell, I had to come to tears. I said, "This is it. This is where you come to," and it was like,
what was that environment like during that time?
Like I said, it was alarms going off, gunshots.
It was like, was it a race war?
Yes, it was, because they had, at that time, there was a conflict between, I guess you can say, was it the Mexican mafia and the BGFs, and that type of situation. And it escalated over months, because that was a time where it was radical. It was, black militancy and, those type of things that were going on at the time. And then from the Mexicans' perspective, you had the Mexican mafia, and then you had the Northerners. They had conflicts, because that group kind of split.
Yes.
Because at one time they were all together. Then they kind of split, and then you had other splinter groups because of the way the gang hierarchy in prison. You had the vanguards. You had other groups that broke away because of control. Somebody wanted to be in control, and people, other groups started to break away, because of the way they indoctrinated you, kind of try to bring you in the group. One of the things that was told to me was, if there's a piece of paper that slides under your door, don't pick it up. Because that's like reading their bylaws and contracts, and once you read it, you're in the group.
You accepted it.
Yes.
Correct.
So when you come out, you pretty much got to ride with, did you read such and such and such? Well, okay, then you're in. So there were other groups that broke away from that type of stuff, and became a defense mechanism against that. So now you had, rival groups, in the black situation, that were kind of in conflict. So like I said, the first 2 weeks was kind of rough for me, because I seen all these different things. And I had just got to a point where boo-hooing is not going to work. I'm like, how long you gonna cry when the door closed? Because when you get out, when you come out your cell, you can't go out your cell crying. You got to soldier up. You got to button your collar up. You got to walk this line. But when you go back in, you boo-hoo and like, what have I done? So my thing was, either you're gonna go nutty, or you got to get out and you got to deal with the situation. And I chose to deal with the situation. So I had to tighten up. There was a lot of things that you had to take for granted in freedom that you had to kind of like get rid of. You had to harden up. A lot of the emotional things, you had to get rid of emotions. You had to get rid of a lot of things that out here, you take for granted.
Mm-hmm.
And you had to walk it off. Say one day at a time, you had to walk it off. And you see a lot of violence. You had to become cold, to that. Because you see people being stabbed, because in level 4s, there's no fighting. There's stabbing, gunshots. They're stabbing until the gun goes off, and they're being shot. So people are being stabbed, and you got to watch out. Don't be bumping up against anybody, because at that time, one drop of blood on your clothing would send you to the hole. So there's a lot of prison things that had to be learned. they say the rule is, don't gamble, don't mess with homosexuals, don't borrow things, and that type of stuff. There were, I think, like 4 different things, that 4 or 5 different things that you don't do. And if you don't do those, you'll be all right. So
Kind of like the 4 commandments of staying alive in prison.
Staying alive in prison. And, he said, as long as you do those, you'll be all right. So
what are they? Don't do drugs, don't gamble.
Don't gamble. No homosexuals. Don't borrow things.
Don't steal.
Don't steal.
Don't steal.
And don't step on nobody's shoes or anything like that. That could be fatal. Because as soon as you step on somebody's shoes, at that time, you step on someone's shoes, you better automatically say, I'm sorry, or pardon me, excuse me. It was that type of situation. You don't bump into people. It's automatically respect. So that was a hard 3-day indoctrination.